The next day after arriving at Marefu, we plunged westward, in view of the villagers, and the Arab ambassador, who kept repeating until the last moment that we should certainly catch it. We marched 8 hours through a forest where the forest peach, or the mbembe, is abundant. The tree that bears this fruit is very like a pear tree, and is very productive. I saw one tree upon which I estimated there were at least 6 or 7 bushels. I ate numbers of the peaches on this day. So long as this fruit can be produced, a traveller in these regions need not fear starvation. At the base of a graceful hilly cone we found a village called Utende, the inhabitants of which were in a state of great alarm as we suddenly appeared on the ridge above them. Diplomacy urged me to send forward a present of 1 doti to the Sultan, who however would not accept it, because he happened to be drunk with pombe, and was therefore disposed to be insolent. Upon being informed that he would refuse any present unless he received 4 more cloths, I immediately ordered a strong boma to be constructed on the summits of a little hill, near enough to a plentiful supply of water, and quietly again packed up the present in a bale. I occupied a strategically chosen position, as I could have swept the face of the hill, and the entire space between its base and the village of the Watende. Watchmen were kept on the lookout all night, but we were fortunately not troubled until the morning, when a delegation of the principal men came to ask if I intended to depart without having made a present to the chief. I replied to them that I did not intend passing through any country without making friends with the chief, and if their chief would accept a good cloth from me, I would freely give it to him. Though they demurred at the amount of the present at first, the difference between us finally ended by my adding a fundo of red beads, sami sami, for the chief's wife. From the hill and ridge of Utende sloped a forest for miles and miles westerly, which was terminated by a grand and smooth topped ridge rising 500 or 600 feet above the plain. A 4 hours' march on the 12th of October brought us to a nullah similar to the Gombe, which, during the wet season, flows to the Gombe River, and thence to the Malagarazi River. A little before camping we saw a herd of nimba, or pala. I had the good fortune to shoot one, which was a welcome addition to our fast diminishing store of dried meats, prepared in our camp on the Gombe. By the quantity of bois de vache, we judged buffaloes were plentiful here, as well as elephant and rhinoceros. The feathered species were well represented by the ibis, fish eagles, pelicans, storks, cranes, several snowy spoonbills, and flamingos. From the nullah, or Mtoni, we proceeded to Mwaru, the principal village of the district of Mwaru, the chief of which is Ka Mirambo. Our march lay over desolated clearings once occupied by Ka Mirambo's people, but who were driven away by Makazawa some 10 years ago, during his warfare against Manwar Sera. Nongo, the brother of the latter, now waging war against Mbogo, had passed through Mwaru the day before we arrived, after being defeated by his enemy. The hilly ridge that bounded the westward horizon, visible from Utende, was surmounted on this day. The western slope trends southwest, and is drained by the river Mrera, which empties into the Malagarazi River. We perceived the influence of the Tanganika even here, though we were yet 12 or 15 marches from the lake. The jungles increased in density, and the grasses became enormously tall. These points reminded us of the maritime districts of Ukawere and Ukami. We heard from a caravan at this place, just come from Ufipa, that a white man was reported to be in Urua, whom I supposed to mean Livingstone. Upon leaving Mawaru, we entered the district of Mrera, a chief who once possessed great power and influence over this region. Wars, however, have limited his possessions to 3 or 4 villages, snugly embosomed within a jungle, whose outer rim is so dense that it serves like a stone wall to repel invaders. There were 9 bleached skulls stuck on top of as many poles before the principal gate of entrance, which told us of existing feuds between the Wakonongo and the Wazavira. This latter tribe dwelt in the country a few marches west of us, whose territory we should have to avoid unless we sought another opportunity to distinguish ourselves in battle with the natives. The Wazavira, we were told by the Wakonongo of Mrera, were enemies to all Wangwana. In a narrow strip of marsh between Mwaru and Mrera, we saw a small herd of wild elephants. It was the first time I had ever seen these animals in their native wildness, and my first impressions of them I shall not readily forget. I am induced to think that the elephant deserves the title of king of beasts. His huge form, the lordly way in which he stares at an intruder on his domain, and his whole appearance indicative of conscious might, afford good grounds for his claim to that title. This herd, as we passed it at the distance of a mile, stopped to survey the caravan as it passed, and, after having satisfied their curiosity, the elephants trooped into the forest which bounded the marshy plain southward, as if caravans were everyday things to them, whilst they, the free and unconquerable lords of the forest and the marsh, had nothing in common with the cowardly bipeds, who never found courage to face them in fair combat. The destruction which a herd makes in a forest is simply tremendous. When the trees are young, whole swaths may be found uprooted and prostrate, which marked the track of the elephants as they trampled their path through wood and brake. The boy Salim was so ill at this place that I was compelled to halt the caravan for him for 2 days. He seemed to be affected with a disease in the limbs, which caused him to sprawl, and tremble most painfully, besides suffering from an attack of acute dysentery; but constant attendance and care soon brought him round again, and the 3rd day he was able to endure the fatigue of riding. I was able to shoot several animals during our stay at Mrera. The forest outside the cultivation teems with noble animals. Zebra, giraffe, elephant, and rhinoceros are most common. Targaman and guinea fowl were also plentiful. The warriors of Mrera are almost all armed with muskets, of which they take great care. They were very importunate in their demands for flints, bullets, and powder, which I always made it a point to refuse, lest at any moment a fracas occurring they might use the ammunition thus supplied to my own disadvantage. The men of this village were an idle set, doing little but hunting, gaping, gossiping, and playing like great boys. During the interval of my stay at Mrera, I employed a large portion of my time in mending my shoes, and patching up the great rents in my clothes, which the thorn species, during the late marches, had almost destroyed. Westward, beyond Mrera, was the wilderness, the transit of which we were warned would occupy 9 days. Hence arose the necessity to purchase a large supply of grain, which, ere attempting the great uninhabited void in our front, was to be ground and sifted. Chapter 10.